I guess we'll get started. This is a panel for Through the Magic Door, the appeal of Portal Fantasy. If this is not where you want to be, now's your last chance to escape while you can before the doors are closed.
Do you guys have a mic? I can hardly hear you, and I'm only halfway.
that was on.
Oh. Through the Magic Door, the appeal of Portal Fantasy. I'll be the moderator. I'm Bishop O'Connell. I write urban fantasy and historical fantasy, and that's the last you're going to be hearing about me. So I will let the rest of the panel introduce themselves, and we'll get started.
Hi, I'm Cass Morris. I'm the author of historical fantasy series The Oven Cycle. I am also 1/3 of the team behind 5-time Hudo finalist podcast, World Building for Masochists. And in my day job, I work in immersive entertainment. Right now, my primary job is working for a company that produces mythology-themed summer camps. Yes, it's awesome.
They're going to have about that. My 8-year-old is running around right now. I'm Alix. I'm sorry you've all heard me before. I've written many, now it feels like, my 4th adult fantasy novel is coming out this fall. And a couple of them, I've got 2 novellas, I guess, technically, that are Portal Fantasies in my debut. So I'm excited to talk about this.
Oh, there's another one.
But I gave
My universe is my own stereo. My name is Krista Cagg. I am an author of steampunk, cosmic horror, and soon contemporary romance centered around conventions, large conventions like RavenCon. I don't do Portal Fantasy, but boy have I read some.
My name is James Blakey. I write science fiction, fantasy, crime, and mystery, and I'm also the publisher of Charlottesville Fantastic, an anthology of fantasy stories set in Charlottesville.
So probably first things first, just to make clear, define the terms we're working with, right? So Portal Fantasy is just moving from one world to another. Typically, the most popular trope is usually moving from our world or a very similar version of our world to a magical fantasy or sci-fi world for let hijinks and adventures ensue from there. So we'll start real high level. What do you think personally is the appeal and the draw of Portal Fantasy itself? And in the description I talked about, is it the state of the world? Is it a personal release? Is it ego? Is it wanting a new type of food that maybe you can't get anywhere?
I think in some ways it can depend on the story, and sometimes it's a wish fulfillment of being the person who gets to go to the other world. But the world itself, I think the appeal is sometimes either that it is somehow better or more interesting than the reality we live in. I think that's an attractive fantasy. I really like the stories that then subvert that and show how the Portal universe is just as messed up as ours, perhaps in different and interesting ways.
Yeah, I think of Portal Fantasies as one of those things that is, you know, if you think about it at all, a pretty near universal mythological structure. Like, it's a very ancient one. There's always stories of crossing some sort of boundary, life and death, or a spirit world, or the land of the fairies, or the land of the gods. So I think of it as this really old tradition that happened to sort of enter Western publishing at the height of the British Empire. And so it sort of is saturated with, again, and I realize I repeat myself, but I'm sorry, you guys shouldn't have come to multiple of my panels. So it's a really kind of laden with now a lot of the ambitions and anxieties of the colonial age that it sometimes subverts now and sometimes doesn't. But I think there's an element of escapism, but underneath that there is sort of the element of the colonial frontier and either exploring and rendering that legible or bringing civilization to that. I'm not supposed to give you this one.
I won't take it from you. Pretty much what Cass said, it's the grass is always greener. Let's face it, we all like fantasy, we all like science fiction, and if we had the opportunity, yeah, there's a portal that opened up, why not? It's also curiosity. What's on the other side, for good or bad? I can't remember what it was, but somebody opened the portal and, are you really gonna put your arm through that? Are you really gonna put your arm through that? And they did. So, you know, you can't resist.
I like the fish out of water experience, going to an entirely new world. I mean, we do this all the time. Like Beverly Hills Cop, he's transported from gritty Detroit to a fantasy land, Beverly Hills, and now with the addition of the portal, we're just amping it up even more. So that's the appeal for me.
I'm sorry, with the Armin portal, I instantly popped to Baldur's Gate 3 and
I
pulling
was
Gale
trying
out
not
of
to
the
make that
rock.
reference, but I did that too many times.
Okay, so how about some examples of what you think were some really good portal fantasies that you really like, but not for maybe for some less common reasons, like something that just struck you that was like, oh, that's a spin on it I never thought of, or that's an interesting take on it. It maybe you subverted a trope, maybe it invented a new trope that you hadn't thought about before. Okay, yeah, we'll start from the other end.
Okay, so
That's a good
I
one.
learned the word tesseract from reading Wrinkle in Time, right? Which that right. So I'm now 7 or 8, right? So it's just right. Meg and Charles Wallace and what's the guy's name? Calvin, off to rescue her father and defeat evil, and where it blew my mind when I was 8 years old. It's absolutely didn't conform to society. I reread that every couple of years just because it's made such a big impact on me.
My first portal experience was going to reveal my age. The Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, which is like the ultimate. And if you're a gamer, oh heck yeah, I'd do that in a heartbeat. But then it gets real. You can't just roll up another character if you roll a 1. You're dead. And along with that, there was a book series by Joel
Rosenberg.
Guardians of the Flames, which is the same kind of concept where a bunch of college people, kids who were sitting around playing D&D, wake up the next day as their characters, and they have to learn how to operate in like a barbarian body when they were this scrawny little kid. And the books go through and show the realistic aspects of that, and I think that was really interesting and always stuck with me.
I just want to say for the record, I would not go through the portal, just to be clear. Just so that we know, like I write about these things, but if something weird appeared, I'd be like, are you going to put your arm in there? No! I don't know what's going to happen.
Okay, so it's just me.
It's just you. Enjoy. I feel like, cool. Tell me how it was. A recent-ish, it's a few years old now, portal fantasy that I really liked was Jeanette Ng's Under the Pendulum Sun. If anybody's read that, and I love it because it pulls a really cool trick where it starts out fairly lighthearted. It's like the fairy world is real and they found a way into it, and then a British missionary is going to go bring God to the fairies, and then like 50% through it turns into a gothic nightmare, and he's driven mad by the things that he sees there, and I think it's brilliant.
Awesome. I'm gonna find
Yeah.
I've recently really enjoyed Shauna Maguire's Wayward Children series, which deals with the coming back from the magic fantasy world in a way that I think is really, really interesting. And if you were a kid who always wanted to find one, it gets an interesting perspective on that. For the record, I would fling myself through a portal. I'm not saying it's a good idea, but I have a reasonable expectation of my own impulse control. I would make terrible choices if presented with the opportunity to do so. But I also liked what the Wayward Children series did with examining the character of different worlds and how in those it's very tied to aesthetic. It's very tied to like, this is the Wonderland, this is the Gothic world, this is the traditional Leonardo-esque world. And similarly, Genevieve Cogman's Invisible Library series has such a fun look at the multiverse of worlds being structured on a spectrum of like orderly to chaotic, and that affects what you can do and how magic and technology work in those different worlds. And I thought that was so much fun. I eat stuff like that up with a spoon. Really delightful series. And very like word-based too. Like there's so much word magic in it, which is just an extra layer of awesome.
You no longer
You have
have
to
an
leave.
identity.
You go now. Stay under the table the rest of the panel.
I'll just throw one piece that I like. It occurred to me as you guys were all talking. I actually like The Magicians. It's one of the few things too. I think where the television show is actually even better than the book, like significantly better. And that's kind of like a portal fantasy inside of a portal fantasy, because they have to go through the portal to get to the break bills, right? And then it's the portal fantasy when they get to I can't think of the name of it.
Fillory.
Fillory, thank you. Yeah. Let's go to the other side and give, if there's anything you want to vent about. Is there anything about portal fantasies or a particular portal fantasy, don't necessarily have to name names, that just absolutely drove you insane? That there was something about it and you were just like, either you wanted to throw the book across the room, or you just criticized it, or maybe you took something out of it and you're like, now see, this is a good thing to put on my list to never do myself. You can't take the easy way out. I won't let you use like really bad negative tropes, like, was really racist or anything like that, or super sexist, which I know that's going to take a lot of books off the table. Just by saying so, unless you can, I'll give you a chance, if you want to go down that path, I'll give you a chance to defend it, but I'm prepared to call you out on it. So, we'll start on this end again.
Yeah, well, I think that sort of underlying imperialism is a big glaring problem with lots of them. But to take a different problem, it relates to something that can be a problem in other sci-fi and fantasy as well, which is when the world feels like it was designed specifically for that character to be their own private little rat maze obstacle course. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's the point in a portal, and I think that can be played with in interesting ways, but when it isn't being consciously done, when it really just feels like this portal universe was set up explicitly for this one point of view character to make their way through, and not in a way that examines that choice, just that's what the story is, and it makes things a little too easy sometimes. That's the kind of trope that will bother me in portal fantasies. If it seems like it's like, and it's a problem with world building in other ways as well. If the world feels like it was designed only for this character, like it doesn't exist outside the realm of this character's experience, the people who live in this realm don't have their own, whole thing going on, that rubs me the wrong way. I'm always like, you could have done better there.
Overly contrived.
Yeah.
This one is really low-hanging fruit, but the end of Narnia when they're kids again and none of it counts.
Yeah.
Any kind of like they wake up and it was a dream, or the whole adventure that you've gone on is taken away somehow. That always, like as a kid, you're like, what? What do you mean? They were kings and queens. I don't think you could do that. And also in general, any kind of a coming of age arc, particularly for the girl characters, that is sort of a like, well, at some point you have to lose your sense of wonder. And there's this sort of grim, like now, like Wendy, or like Susan, or like there's a particular kind of way that they have to then become caretakers and become boring. And I think there's even a line about Susan becoming interested in lipstick, and it's like, so she could never find her voice again. And it's like,
This is probably going to be an unpopular opinion, but I lost interest in the ACOTAR books into the 3 chapters into the second book. They seem to change Fair to make the male characters the heroes and the saviors, as opposed to her saving herself. She turned into this dish rag, and they were trying to change her, make her better, and I literally took the book and threw it across the room. Like, she was such a strong character in the first book, and then she turns into this dish rag who can't do anything in the second one. And I was told, keep reading, but I couldn't get past it. And so I don't like when they change aspects of the character, so it seems like they change that aspect of the character to enhance other characters. I don't think it was necessary. Hate me if you want.
She does get better, but it's brutal.
Okay, so this is not strictly fantasy, more science fantasy, but if you remember in the mid-90s, a Fox show called Sliders, where they would slide to different worlds. It was very interesting at first. You got to, they got to play a lot with different, what worlds look like, address social issues. Then the network executives brought in the Cro-Mags, and it became, this action adventure show. And then Fox canceled it and went to Sci-Fi Channel, and Jerry O'Connell used his power to get his brother, who doesn't really have a lot of acting ability, on the show, and it just spiraled out of control. And I think Tracy Torme, who created the show, like quit, or he was either fired because of the Cro-Mag, because he didn't want to do Cro-Mags and the networks like this. So it was a great 1.5 season run, and then it just spiraled out of control.
So don't cast your brother.
Nepotism is always a bad idea. It never works out well. Okay, so on the opposite side of that, what is one that maybe didn't appear to be a portal fantasy, or maybe is kind of on the cusp, right? Because I think nowadays especially, I think genres, the lines between genres is so fuzzy, right? I mean, like Arthur Clarke's third law, right? That any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So, what are some ideas that, like, maybe some stories that at first blush may not look like portal fantasies, that they don't fit the, when you're just looking at the cover or you're just getting the idea, but you look and you're like, oh wow, actually yeah, this totally is a portal fantasy. And in fantasy, sci-fi, anything like that. And I actually think, just to kind of get your brains going, because I can see you're all kind of noodling on it, I'll give you a second to think about your answer. You actually made a good point when you were talking about the Beverly Hills Cop, that was a type of a portal fantasy, right? That he went from the gritty urban Detroit to the glitzy, very, very fantastical Beverly Hills. But we'll start on your end. You don't get to use that one again, though.
Okay. So, great, so I made a list. All right, so something that doesn't appear to be a full portal fantasy, but is maybe from the DVD cover. How about Tron?
Yeah.
Right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and that's very much of the, right, well, we're kind of old in here, right? So video games were the thing, right? So the whole idea of a video game world at that time just really appealed. And yeah, I can't say much about the second. I think they're even making a third. So
Yeah,
that's
third.
definitely right. This isn't remakes and retreads, but they really should have just stayed with the first two.
Maybe it was obvious, but kind of not. First comes to mind is Labyrinth. It's almost a hero's arc, where she is going through a whole bunch of self-discovery and has to make decisions. And yeah, she's transported, but it could have happened anywhere. The story could have happened in the real world, and it didn't have to be in the fantasy world. And I think that's the beautiful thing about Labyrinth, is that you could retell that story and put it anywhere. Put it in the mall. It'll be the same thing.
It becomes a human trafficking story and it gets really
Dark.
Okay, I went the wrong way.
No, I like that one because it's such an old mythological structure, right? Of like, there's a deal that's happened, you made the wrong wish, and now you have to like bargain with this thing that's also a temptation. I really like that a lot. I realize most magic school stories of whatever kind are portal fantasies, whether they explicitly step through into another world or not. And my favorite of them, because I'm not ever going to speak with the one you're thinking of ever again, is Sarah Reese Brennan's In Other Lands, which is a really great, if you were looking for something that will give you good feelings in the absence of, let's say, an author becoming a massively disappointing and actively evil person in the world. That one is so good, and it's actively undermining a lot of the tropes that are built into both magic school stories and portal fantasies. And it's very consciously, it's doing the thing that I think a lot of the fish out of water stories do, which is that using this other culture to sort of like cause you sometimes humorously to reflect on the obvious things about our culture.
I'm going to swing totally wide and go to a slightly different form of media, which is that immersive experiences, I think, are a kind of real-world portal fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
They are things that give you that opportunity to step through a door and get that wish fulfillment of getting to be the hero, of playing out a story in real life in the way that portal fantasies generally describe. And it's something that in building them, we think about a lot. We think about the transition into and out of the world. What does the portal look like for each person that's, coming in? How do we meet them where they are? How do we teach them the rules of the world that they're stepping into? And that's part of what I think is really exciting for me about working in that field. And it's becoming something that I think people are thinking more and more critically about, especially that narrative structure. And I don't know that I've ever heard anyone talk about it as a portal fantasy, but it very much has a very, very similar structure. And at the Universal Park, Epic Universe, they are literalizing it. Each of the lands has like a tunnel portal that you go through to get into the island of Burke or Darkmoor or wherever it is you're going. I can't wait to go. It's going to be a while before I can get to it, but I can't wait to go see those.
So I would say, along with that, the convention is somewhat of a portal fantasy.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
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 You need a key to enter the space.
With that in mind, we'll give you guys a break to kind of let Jen go. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask for them? Yeah.
I have one. As problematic as he may be, like my first adult, like outside of Narnia experience of portal fantasy was Piers Anthony and his Blue Adept. And what I think was really appealing to me about those books was that it was like almost a hard genre flip in between those portals. So on one side it's unicorns and magic, and on the other side it's like he is in this robot, mechanical, very tech world. Do you have any examples of things where it is that like portal fantasy that's like a hard genre flip on your
Before
radar?
I hand it off to them, I'll just say, don't feel bad. I think if you're above a certain age, there's no way around you to get away from your first authors being problematic.
Yeah.
They're kind of all that way, even if they themselves
I was
aren't.
probably a little too young to be reading Beauty and the Beast, but I didn't
Yeah,
know that.
yeah. So don't feel bad. That doesn't say anything about you. Jibs.
A problematic, but it was deliberately problematic, is the Gore series. Anybody familiar with the Gore series?
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Could I read any of the books? No.
Excuse me. For those of you who don't know, it's not necessarily stepping through a portal. It's another Earth on the other side of the sun. And men and women are taken from our Earth to populate that Earth in a very barbaric kind of Conan the Barbarian. There was a really bad movie from about Gore. I can't remember what it was
There were
called.
4 really bad movies.
Oh boy. And there's lots. It really paints women in horrible, horrible light. It completely dehumanizes them. And yet they were staggeringly popular to the point where apparently they made 4 bad movies. Did you say? Yeah, okay. And I read them. I read some of them. And in some way they kind of scratched a Conan the Barbarian itch. But at the same time I was mad at myself and the author. So it was, that's the problem.
Sarah Reese Brennan, the same author of In Other Lands, just has a new one come out called Long Live Evil. And I think that is the closest that I can think of to a genre flip, because it's the real world story is a woman dying of cancer. It's very bleak, it's very realistic. Sarah Reese Brennan herself barely recovered from stage 3 cancer. So it's one of the most intensely real and detailed, sort of deeply ill main characters that you'll read, and it's really hard to get through. And then she goes into her favorite book series, where she is cast not as a heroine, but as a minor villain, who she knows dies very soon. So it is then the absolutely comical, high ridiculousness story of her unionizing the minor villains. It's
sounds
so
incredible.
good. They don't even have names. She was like, "You look like a thug. You're a guard. Join this union." And she pretends to know the future because she's read the books. It's pretty excellent.
Slight addition to that, it's not quite as severe as Blue Adept on its changes. The Lona Andrews Kate series has the when the magic's up, magic is real, you can do things, the cars are powered by magic steam engines. When magic's down, firearms and combustion engines rule the land. And so you can't predict when the waves come, so you kind of either have technology that works in both, or sorry, technology / magic works in both, or do without whatever thing you're depending on, you know, which one was. So it does a pretty good job on that shifting between the two.
I just want to sort of comment or see what you think. In preparing as an audience member for this panel, I thought of The Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court, and Alice in Wonderland, where the second book, Through the Looking Glass, was obviously important, but the first one, The Rabbit Hole, was not so obvious.
Well, do you think the argument can be made that time travel stories are a type of portal fantasy?
I mean, I think Outlander would count, right?
Yeah. Anybody else?
Time bandits, right?
Yeah.
The ultimate time travel portal.
Yeah.
Yes.
We have this wonderful renaissance of portal fantasy, be it the authors, the glut of Isekai anime. But a lot of the older works, aside from maybe Narnia, I kind of fear being overlooked, whether it be John Carter of Mars, Thomas Covenant, even the Oz series. Is there anything maybe we can do for this wonderful new group of fans to be like, hey, you like this stuff? Check out the classics. And maybe what are some of your favorite classics?
Yeah, I don't think that's a goal of mine. Like, not to be a jerk, but like truly, I'm reading books to my kids, and a lot of times, like we're talking about, where you're like, you hit these books that you maybe loved a lot when you were younger, and then you're reading either about the actual author or the books themselves, and you're like, oh, no. No, I think there's probably some new stuff that is not this, and I think that's perfectly fine. I don't ever want to sort of, it's fine for me if my kids find them in the opposite order, and only read some older stuff if they happen to be interested in this genre, like after they're pretty familiar with how other things could work. I also do think it's interesting that you mentioned like the Oz books. My 6-year-old is trying to read those right now because of Wicked. So like I do think the good things are kind of pulled back up again and again, and they're not really necessarily endangered.
Yeah, I think the avenue I come at it is going back to some of the really older mythologies, the stories of crossing into the fairy otherworld, things like that. Those are stories I've used in designing our quests at camp, things like that, because there's still an appeal, but mythology is so flexible that I can recontextualize it in ways that become modern, shed as much of the ickiness as possible, aren't beholden to a single author and whatever baggage and burdens may come with that individual author. So going back to the really old stuff is, I think, where I'm more interested when it comes to resurrection.
True classics.
True, bonkers things, honestly.
I have a feeling with the classics, things like Alice Through the Looking Glass, Wonderland, but I also want to throw out there the original Peter Pan. I will always recommend somebody reading the originals in contrast to what has been watered down, like Disney's Peter Pan. Yes, it's problematic in its own ways, but it's nothing like the book. The Alice series, that's some wacky stuff right there. But then you also get into the old Grimm's fairy tales, Rip Van Winkle, the person stuffs through the mushroom ring, the Fae Folk Under the Hill. Those are some really rich and wonderful stories that I feel everybody should read, especially if you're a creative type. You can draw inspiration from those things.
I mean, well,
No
I'm not
pressure.
sure. Right, following up what Alex said, right, Wicked, so everybody's back on Oz again, it seems to go in cycles. We had one okay live-action Alice movie and one really bad live-action Alice movie. Right, Netflix is doing Narnia. We had the John Carter disaster, so I think they're still, like, in the zeitgeist, people are still paying attention to that kind of thing.
So a common trope we see with a lot of the portal fantasies is the main characters of the person who goes to the portal tends to be kids, right? And obviously some of that is practicality, right? I mean, you've said yourself that if you saw the portal, you would not jump through. And I mean, I know as I've gotten older, it's like I would go, but I have cats
Student loans can't find me in Narnia.
That is fair, and cats are portable. I could take them with me. Do you think that it's the idea behind Portal Fantasies? Do you think it was more that children were put in that place as to make them a children's story, or do you think it was a practicality reason? What are your thoughts on why do you think that the children are typically the protagonists, and do you think that is the only valid option? Do you think that you can have options where it's more of an adult in Portal Fantasy?
I think you definitely can and should have those options and explore them, and I enjoy those stories. I think there's probably a lot of overlapping reasons why. There is something about the trope of the innocence of youth being able to permeate certain, boundaries and things like that. It might also be related to a childlike, lack of inhibition, that thing that's going to stop you from flinging yourself through, the realization, the various ties to the real world that kids have fewer of because their worlds are usually generally smaller. I feel, I don't know, I might come back. I'm going to pass off as I'm chewing on thoughts still.
Okay, I'm sorry for everyone.
No, bring it, bring it.
Okay, so I feel like you can make a very good argument that Portal Fantasies emerge in British culture, largely in publishing, starting in like 1840s, and I'm thinking of Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, Narnia, much later in the 20th century. And children's publishing at the time was really an emerging industry. It was the first time we've had an actual intention to sell specifically for children's readership, and this is in part because literacy rates were skyrocketing for the first time. They had free public schools for the first time in like the Western world, and so like literacy rates were going up. The empire was also expanding, and so there was suddenly like a national interest in educating children, not just to have educated citizens, but to kind of build good empire builders, to make good imperial citizens. No, there's like Little Soldiers ABC, and it teaches you the names of all the countries that are colonies in your world. Like, I'm not even kidding. Like, this is a very explicit project. No one was embarrassed of this. This wasn't a conspiracy, right? Like, this was the plan.
It's all very British.
All very British. All very British. And so I really think that a lot of children's fiction at the time, I'm not even saying specifically Portal Fantasies, the idea was to train you into sort of envisioning yourself as a civilizing force. And so that's all, the entire genre of boys' adventure stories, like R.M. Ballantyne, all that stuff. It was all built around, there's this group of 3 little boys that gets shipwrecked, or there's this group of 4 little boys and 1 token girl to act as their mom, who gets somehow separated from their tour group, and they have to like find civilization in colonial Egypt or something like that. And I think Portal Fantasies basically function in the same ways that are kind of teaching some of the same skill sets. I think one of the more interesting publishing stories is that Lord of the Flies was written as a direct response to R.M. Ballantyne's The Coral Island, which is about 3 little British schoolboys who get stranded on an island. But in his narrative, they find some natives and they civilize them, and when they're rescued, they're all drinking tea and having a great time. And so it was an explicit undermining. It was like, no, it wouldn't be like that, actually. Here's what a human character is. And so I really feel like the emphasis on child characters is a product of its sort of publishing history and imperial history.
How much of that is from your master's degree?
Yeah.
I have a master's in history, and I wrote my thesis on British children's fiction in this era.
Well, and it actually came out that they did find there was a real event where a bunch of schoolboys got stranded on an island for 18 months, and it did not work at all like the Lord of the Flies. They actually all did realize we have to work together, we have to make this all work, and it was just kind of,
But they weren't British school children.
that's very true. That is, my last name is O'Connell. I absolutely agree. That is a very key point.
Building on that, I feel that the children's books with the Portal, they're lessons that were the same lessons that they were received in the oral traditions. Don't go into the woods. So if you go into the woods, Baba Yaga's gonna get you, or the witch in the gingerbread house, or the fairy folk, whatever it is. And so those stories kind of just evolved into these warning stories of Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan. It's the same thing. It's don't go with strangers, don't go into the woods. And it just adapted to what the times needed. And I think it's still happening now with children's or even adults portal. I had a portal in mind for the adults and I can't remember it now. I blame it being Sunday at a con.
I don't know, an adult portal sounds like its own particular genre. But maybe-
That was last night's panel.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
Space
last
panel.
night's panel.
Cut my paste.
Yeah, I'm sitting here trying to think of an adult portal fantasy, and the only one I could come up with was, all right, so there was Welcome to, Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, it was like 2017, and then they made a sequel where they send Danny Glover and Danny DeVito into the video game, and they're crotchety old men outside the game, and they're crotchety old men inside the game, and maybe that's why it doesn't work, because, right? I mean, the first one is a guilty pleasure, I will admit, I really love it. Kevin Hart, The Rock, Jack Black, I mean, there's all on, but yeah, maybe that's why, just adults just, you know, they're in there, set in their ways already.
Well, you would have the right to go back if there was
I
no
see
subject.
it.
Well, and something that you hit upon, one sec. Just one thing that's kind of leading off of this. How much do you think there is with the idea, maybe it's not even intentional, is there a fetishization with the idea of the portal fantasy? Because having its roots from the British Empire and, you know, it's the you know, the wonders of the Orient type thing, that is it like a subtle, like, polite version of fetishization?
I mean, like, so much of Western lit was that for so long. Like, whenever you're going into this strange and otherworldly place and you're finding the things, you know, like, you are feeding into, willingly or not, like a certain fetishization of often the East, probably, but like Asian cultures, other cultures in general. I think in some ways maybe it's rescued a little bit by mostly being children's perspectives, like that there was actually way worse directions we could go in than it doesn't. But I always think of the academic Mary Louise Pratt has this concept of the imperial eye, and it is the idea that whatever land you are entering or exploring can be rendered knowable and legible kind of to the state. So think how often they're like trying to find maps or make a map, or to somehow find the borders of whatever this place is and make it an understandable place. Something that has this chaotic where it's not ruled by anyone. There's 4 empty thrones, for example. I don't know why. It's weird. Rendered. I know, it's so strange.
So
There's
convenient.
4 of us that can be made into something that can be understood by a state.
I was just gonna comment that, to me, almost any children's book has the children running away from the bad adults.
And that's what I was gonna say.
Who are boring or stultifying or whatever. And some of those are portal books and some of them are like Huck Finn or whatever.
Did you have more?
That was my same comment, is that you look at it structurally, children's literature, how do they get rid of the parents? You know, variety of ways, but that, in that sense, a portal fantasy is just one more lazy way, kind of. Sorry.
I love
Portal
I was gonna say, going off that,
Yeah.
there should be more grown-ups, because don't we all just wanna run away?
Right.
Like,
The Peter Pan movie, the cartoon, actually dealt with that. The same actor who voiced the father voiced Captain Hook. So Captain Hook took the place of the overbearing father. That's my comment.
Yeah, but they can be Captain Hook, and you cannot, in a real children's book, have the kids fight their parents.
Well, I guess on the opposite end of that, the movie Hook is the dad running away.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
That's fun.
I love that movie.
Yeah, that's a fun inversion on it. Because he doesn't want to, actually. He doesn't want to run away at first. He gets snatched away. I think there's something, there's this sort of underlying appeals that I don't think are unique to children, but I think are perhaps particularly poignant in them or something. Like going into a place where it's a world with rules you can understand, right? There's going to be rules. If you learn them, you can understand them. The world is an incomprehensible thing to kids, to adults too, but kids very much want there to be rules they can understand, and if there aren't, they will make them up, and enforce them on you.
So are some adults.
Oh, howdy. There's the promise of certain kinds of fiction that good will eventually triumph, right? That's a thing that people have an instinct to want, even if it's so very rarely true. The recognition that you are special, that you matter. Like, we all want to feel that, don't we? Like, we all want to feel like we're special and like we matter. And then the escape from pressures, dangers, and trauma of the real world, which I think is a lot of where that issue with the adults can come in, and I think it's interesting to see the variety of adults that are run away from in these kinds of stories. Like, sometimes they're just perfectly benign, they're just boring and mundane or whatever, and sometimes they're abusers, and it's like that's a big old spectrum of things to wrestle with. And I don't know, actually, I think that core is maybe simpler to create a narrative out of if you're dealing with a young protagonist as opposed to somebody with more of their own hang-ups and baggage and history and things like that, which is why I want to see more of the more complex stuff. I want to see more of 35-year-old with student loans running away to join the fairies.
There was a meme that went around about high school teachers. Instead of the students going through the portal, the teachers do, and you wind up, the English teacher winds up becoming the wizard.
Yeah.
The PE teacher becomes the barbarian. You've got the social studies teacher who's just like, no, I'm checking out. I know where this is going. I see all the tea leaves, and I'm noping completely out. I'm just trying to find a way home.
That was a meme? Because
Yeah.
that actually sounds like a really good book.
There's a lot of those that come out, right? You see a lot of the memes. You're like, wow, this could have been a really good start to a book if somebody took it and ran with it.
Well, I think you mentioned The Magicians earlier, and one of the reasons I like the TV series better than the books is that the TV series aged them up to be grad students and college students, and I'm like, yeah, the experiences they're having, those are grad school experiences.
Yeah.
That's the way they're approaching the world.
Yeah.
Just that little more edge of more maturity, I think, plays into the way that world's story plays out.
Yeah, and the characters were developed way better to fit.
Yeah, Alex, when I said your name, you started laughing. I'm so sorry.
I was trying.
Am I boring you?
When you were writing 10,000 Doors of January, can you talk a little bit about how you put kind of this imperialism and all this kind of stuff into that book and the way you approached it?
Alex, you've been saying nothing but bad things about Portal Fantasies, and yet I noticed you wrote one. Fair enough.
Contextualization is important.
Yeah. No, I think I was just really interested in because the unspoken half of being they're rooted in imperialism is that I loved them, and these are the stories that I grew up on, and so there was this real nostalgia for something, and you want to try and find a way that you can sort of extract the nostalgia and the things you love, and the sense of escape, the sense of wonder, and try to invert the power dynamics a little bit. So I approached that one thinking in particular about the idea of it being an othered space that you enter, have an adventure, conquer whatever it is, and then leave. So instead of an escape, it had to be a cyclical story about going home. So I wanted to restructure the entire thing to be actually that othered space is where she belongs. And that is her origins. And to try and in some way make the real world or our historical world be the space that is alien or othered or strange or not where you belong, to try and reverse that and see how many things would be fixed if you start from there.
So decolonizing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like you escape from a cult, right? You have to be deprogrammed.
Yeah, exactly.
Anybody else? Anybody else have any questions? All right, well, we've got a few minutes left. I'll try, any particular stories you want to recommend to anybody in any particular media that fall into this category that you think are just fun, are really great examples of it, or just something you want to share with everybody in the group?
I remembered what I was going to talk about.
Okay. Okay.
It's horror genre, but it Grave Encounters, where they get stuck in the ghost investigation and basically removed from reality. Or even the Blair Witch Project, where they get stuck in the woods. But one of the best ones is a Guillermo del Toro movie with the little girl.
Pan's Labyrinth.
And it's scary.
Yeah.
Traumatizing. But there's so much beauty in it as well. And I think there's the portal, like some horror film creators use the portal in the same teaching way that the portal fantasies do, but just in a way that will give you nightmares.
Well, when it comes to recommendations, I'm going to plug my industry. Go find immersive experiences. Go give yourself a portal experience. Those are portals you can fling yourself through, and you know you come back. Whether it's half an hour, 2 hours, 2 days, you know you get to you come back to the real world. But that does not mean the experience isn't going to be transformative. I think the immersive entertainment industry is really, really making a lot of progress in telling important stories, in finding a place in these worlds for everyone, in building worlds that no matter who you are, there is a role for you here. There is a way you can influence this story and be the hero, whatever your background is, wherever you have come from. And go allow yourself to play. That is such an important thing. And that might be another thing, that reason that like we see lots of the younger characters. Adults often forget how to play. They forget to play. And it is so important for our brains, for our social interactions. So go find things like that wherever they are and commit wholeheartedly. You know, fling yourself into them and really, really get in there, and it'll do fun things for your brain.
Are there plans for an immersive grown-up mythology camp?
I wish. I
Can we
keep
come to camp?
trying to tell my boss that people would throw money at us.
Oh, yeah.
And she's like, but that's not what we do. And I'm like, a hotel for a weekend. I can do it. Just get. I'm working on it.
I already mentioned Sarah Reese Brennan and Jeanette Ng. I think they're two great authors who are doing cool portal fantasies. But if any of you have kids or kids who read graphic novels, there's a new graphic novel series called The Dungeon Club, which is kind of it's D&D again, but they get sucked into the world of it. It's an idea that's been done before, but it's really cute, and my kids love them.
Going way back, when I was 8 years old, Land of the Lost, right?
Oh my God,
And they had
CX.
they had serious writers. Niven wrote for it, Sturgeon wrote for it. I have not watched it in many, many years. I don't know
It's
how
on
well
Tubi.
it holds up, but
It doesn't.
It doesn't. Oh, never mind.
But it's fun to watch.
Okay, well, that lines us up perfectly to the end then.
Thank you.
So, one last time, let everyone tell us who you are, where we can find you, if you've got anything else going on today, and if not, where they can find you outside of RavenCon.
Absolutely. I'm Cass Morris. I immediately go from here over to the other building to do Mythology 101 in the kids track. If you want to find me, I am Cass Morris everywhere online. I've got cards if you want to grab one real quick. It's got a QR code to all my stuff.
I'm Alex, and I'm done now. This is so you can find me chasing around two kids. We're gonna do the escape room, I think.
I am Krista Cagg. I'm going to not move out of this chair because I'm in here the next panel, which is why horror. Obviously, I have an affection for horror. I have a table in the dealer's room, but I won't be there because it closes in an hour. But you can find my books at Chaos Publications in the dealer room. Other than that, Google search Krista Cagg. There's only one of me.
I'm James Blakey. I am done with the panels. You can find me online at jamesblakeywrites.com.
And I am Bishop O'Connell. You cannot find me at bishopoconnell.com. You will find many high schools and or the Catholic Church. So you have to go to aquietpint.com. But thank you all very much. Thank you to the guests. Thank you to the panelists.